Blog Talk Radio.
To Beyond Paranormal Radio. You're listening to Brett Watson. We've got a great show set up tonight with Michael Mott. First up, he's the author of Caverns, Cauldrons and Concealed Creatures. And second up after him, we have Ashley Hall from the Paranormal Guide coming on. Now, usually at this point I bring Taryn on, but her cell phone's been playing silly buggers whenever we have the show, actually. So, yeah, we can't bring her on today. As I was going to call her landline and get her on there, but for some reason it's snowing in Texas. But so she can't make it on today. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring on Michael Mott. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you awesome.
Great. That's great. I've never Skyped through Blog Talk before. I was hoping it would work okay.
Yeah. Well, I was a bit worried because I'm fairly new to Blog Talk, so I haven't really ever done it before myself that way. But I messaged them and they assured me you could do it, so obviously you can, which is awesome.
Right.
But you're the author of Caverns, Cauldrons and Concealed Creatures. When did you start researching all this sort of stuff and the Hollow Earth theory sort of things?
Well, I've always researched, anomalous stuff. I had an early interest in these types of topics, when I was a kid. When I was in the U.S., we have I don't know if you guys in Australia have this. We have a publisher here called Scholastic, and even when I was and when I was in the fourth and fifth grade, I would see books by Frank Edwards and other guys that wrote stuff, 4T and stuff for kids, and I would order that. And then of course I later on was reading Brad Steiger and John Keel and and all these guys, and but at the same time I had a strong interest in science fiction and fantasy and folklore mythology, and so I've written on all these topics, and I've written both fiction and nonfiction. But with Caverns, Cauldrons, and Concealed Creatures, it's now in the third edition, but the first edition was basically written, I started working on it in 1999, and it was published in part in some online journals in 2000, and then in 2001 the first edition came out, and the third edition is now much, much larger. And Yeah, and the reason I wrote it was because I saw that, you know, a lot of the things that people today are so fascinated with, all these strange phenomena, strange creatures, supposed mysteries, all these things, these are nothing new. You know, if you're a student of history, of folklore, mythology, religion,
Yeah.
you'll recognize the same forms, the same patterns, and the same archetypes over and over again. And, you know, a lot of the things that people kind of dream up in terms of interpretation is pretty spurious. And so I finally decided, you know, somebody needs to look at some of this stuff and try to evaluate it, you know, in a historical context, more or less.
Yeah, well, I'd say it is quite a large book. I've actually been going through it, and I have to admit I've only gotten about probably 60-70% through it because I got the Kindle edition.
Right.
And but it's incredibly interesting, and I noticed that there is a hell of a lot of similarities between different nationality kind of beliefs. Like I noticed the Native American Indian mythology kind of has the same as it's kind of similar to the Mayans.
Right.
Because they had kind of a levels, didn't they?
Right. And yeah, I mean, you know, Xibalba was the Mayan underworld, but you know, a lot of Native American people claim that they had an origin, you know, coming out of the ground. Close to where I live here, the Choctaw tribe claims that they came out of the earth. You know, but even going back to even the Apache had similar beliefs, but you know, they tied it into a cataclysm that had taken place, where they escaped something that they called the Old Fire Land, which they claimed had been destroyed, and then it sank beneath the ocean, and it was destroyed by fire. That's why they called it the Old Fire Land. And they claimed that they escaped in two ways. They escaped by ship or by boat, and they escaped through tunnels. And the Apache, you know, they had a very strong tradition about that. So, you know, these same patterns come up again and again all over the world.
Yeah. So what sort of, like the Indians talked about the kind of creatures that were down in, it was on different levels, wasn't it? Did they say there was, I think the Indians, there was about eight or so different levels going down underground, is that correct?
Well, you know, I mean, all different belief systems, you know, there are different theories about, you know, what the underworld consists of. Of course, the underworld obviously is associated with the dead. It's associated with the afterlife, and usually a very unpleasant afterlife. If you end up in the underworld, it's not generally a good thing. But at the same time, there are traditions about, you know, beings that live under the earth. Native Americans are just one of many groups that have these belief systems, and I don't know about 8 levels. I know that the Hopi believe that there were several levels, you know, beneath what they call the Sipapu, and you know, again, they claim they were down there for a time while the earth was undergoing a cataclysm, and that they were protected there, and then they came out. They were down there with non-human beings that they called the snake people, and another group they called the ant people. But you know, you have this theme recurring around the world of reptilian humanoids living underground, as in the Hopi snake people, or as in the on the Indian subcontinent. You know, you have the Naga, who are a race of superhumanoid reptilians that are very advanced. And again, they all have these same motifs just come up again and again. Yeah, yeah.
And one thing I read in the book which kind of intrigued me, and I read about it, and I thought to myself, I'd really love to go over and see these. There's in Mississippi, there's like cave mounds.
Yeah, there's a mound here. It's in Mississippi, but it has now been closed off to the public. It's actually it's a natural formation, and it's kind of strange because in the part of the state that it's in, there really aren't any big rock outcrops. But this thing just rises up out of the ground, and then it's got dirt on it, but it's basically stone. And I've been there several times before they closed it off, and it has caves, little caves that go into the front of it, but most people didn't realize that around back there was a bigger entrance that has now been walled up with concrete because people got down in there and got lost in decades past. Something bad happened. I'm not sure all the details, but the Choctaw claim that they had they call it the Nanawaya Cave Mound, and they claim that that they had come out of this mound in antiquity from the underworld. Of course, they have other traditions saying they came from somewhere else, but they claim that that it was an entrance to the underworld. And they also had another tradition about how for a season, they hid inside the mound because a race of horned giants who were also man-eaters were preying on them, and so they would hide in the mound and come out at night, and they defeated the horned giants by using poisoned arrows. And if you look at the history of North America, you'll find all over North America you have histories of legends among Native Americans of cannibal giants, and then you have anomalous skeletons that have been found of horned giants and giants without horns and giants with double rows of teeth and all this sort of thing, and 6 fingers and 6 toes, and it's the same thing you see with some sites that have been found elsewhere in the world where even in the Old Testament you read about the descendants of the Nephilim and how they had 6 fingers and 6 toes and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of strange that these same things pop up again and again all over the world, which makes you say, where there's smoke.
All of those Nephilim sort of stories come out of Egypt too, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They come up everywhere. When you look at the legends of Europe, like the trolls and of Scandinavia and things of this nature, you're dealing with something that supposedly that dwells underground. It only comes out in order to prey on regular humans, sometimes for food, but often for sexual reproduction, because they need human genetics. And that's a theme that you find again and again in association with both the Nephilim and beings that live inside the earth.
Yeah, because it's really interesting to look at these hollow earth theories, even go through the likes of Jules Verne and Tolkien and Lovecraft and all that.
Right.
That's even got a bit of cryptozoology comes into that too, doesn't it?
Well, sure it does. I'm not a hollow earther per se. I believe that there are aspects of our biosphere that we don't see because they are far removed from us. I'm talking about things in the crust, environments within the crust, environments beneath the ocean, things that indicate that a lot of the mysteries that we think are from somewhere else far away are actually probably from right here where we are. They're probably from beneath our feet, behind our back, and they've learned to adapt to avoid detection by us pesky humans because we tend to eradicate things that we perceive to be a danger or a threat. That's why we don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore because our ancestors took care of that. So, I think that there's something going on here, and there always has been.
Yeah, because even with with Loch Ness,
right?
You write in your book about how they've discovered all these deep caverns down inside Loch Ness, and they're quite extensive from what you say.
Exactly. There are some deep caverns, in the deepest parts of the loch, along the sides of the loch. And they're just, they don't have any way of knowing how deep they are. They're large. They're really large openings. And, when you look at a lot of the northern latitudes, that's where a lot of these big lake monsters show up. And they are seen from time to time, like, in rivers like the River Ness. But there are some lakes where these things show up, and there's no natural egress, or entrance to the sea that you can see.
Yep.
So you have to say, when you have a strange thing, something huge sighted in a crater lake, for instance, there's got to be a way that thing's coming in there. I'm not going to stand here or sit here and tell people, everybody who sees something anomalous is either lying or deluded or mistaken, because that would be absurd. The same testimony from the same people would stand up in a murder trial if it were just a different topic, okay?
Yeah.
So why would you not believe somebody that said, I saw this and I swear I saw it? In writing this type of material, I've come into contact with so many people that are scared to tell their story, because they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be, kicked out of their school or their church or their community, or have problems on the job. And so when people do come forward, I admire the fact that they do come forward and tell what they experienced. And so when somebody sees something like that, you have to say, how are these things getting around? It's just like with hairy humanoids or hominids. Whatever you believe Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yowie, all these things really are, they have a perplexing tendency to just vanish. And I think there's considerable evidence, especially if you look through anecdotal evidence, eyewitness accounts, and also going back through history and folklore, mythology, and things like this, that these beings have a largely underground habitat. They come out when they're hungry, they come out when they have a purpose, and then they go back to where they came from.
And a lot of the sightings do, you write about this in the book, and I really do. I've sort of read about certain sightings of all these sorts of things, and they do tend to appear around cavernous areas.
Yes, they do. And they'll follow, people say, well, they'll follow bodies of water. But what they fail to understand is that especially running water, those types of environments tend to lead to caves, caverns, sumps. Water is always going to seek the lowest point. And obviously water provides food and so forth. So sometimes they probably do travel along those routes when they're moving from location to location. But then again, they've been sighted in mines, tunnels, even train tunnels, caverns, of course, caves, all this sort of thing. So, if our distant ancestors lived in caves, why should we not assume that things like this may not have even adapted further to continue that type of existence? And even given that, if they have the ultrasound technique or capability that some researchers believe they have, why could they not use that almost like a form of echolocation, in a really dark, lightless environment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even to this date, I still think that there could be more DNA-style evidence of these things like Sasquatch and stuff that are around. But they found hair or something in Puerto Rico, didn't they?
Well, they're finding samples all the time. The problem is that it seems to be a tendency, if you'll look at all the stories of hair samples, whatever people say that it is, quite often, probably the majority of the time, they'll send the samples off and then they'll come back and they'll say, well, it's contaminated. What's it contaminated with? Well, it's contaminated. If it's not an animal like a dog or something like this, or a coyote or a wolf, then they'll say, well, it's contaminated with human DNA. But, that begs the question, as Melba Ketchum has, I know she's caught a lot of flack, but, her DNA study seems to me to be quite legitimate. And as she has shown with her independent labs, independent DNA analysis by reputable scientists, that the samples that have been sent tend to be tend to have mitochondrial DNA, which is to say the female DNA, at least in the lineage somewhere, that is human. And the rest of it is literally unknown. It's an unknown hominid or something completely unknown. But this says that there's some sort of hybridization involved in these things, which I think is fascinating because this is something that's just come out in the last year or so. And, I wrote about this, I wrote about the legends about the hybridization origin of these things, when I first wrote the first edition of the book, and of course it's now in the third edition. But this is something that folklore has told us about for centuries, kidnapping youths and maidens and all this sort of stuff. So, this is a very old story.
Yeah. Well, it goes back for as long as recorded history, pretty much, doesn't it?
Sure does. It definitely does. It even goes back, to the Epic of Gilgamesh or Gilgamesh. He had a friend named Enkidu, and Enkidu was basically described kind of like a Sasquatch. Yeah. And of course, that story is full of going into the underworld and all this kind of stuff. And that's the oldest known story that was ever written down, as far as we know. So, it's a very old motif.
Yeah, yeah. What's your view on, say, Mothman, or even the Hopkinsville Goblin?
Well, I write about those little jokers in the book a little bit, and also
Yeah,
Mothman. Again, if you look at it at our own myths and legends, I don't see why we don't listen to the ancient people who told us these things, because they weren't just a bunch of superstitious fools. I mean, these people were building incredible structures out of stone that we can't even build today. They were doing things that we have forgotten how to do, or we couldn't do. We think of them as primitive, but they weren't primitive. We just happen to have the benefit. We're the recipients of huge amounts of cumulative knowledge, and we're just lucky that some event hasn't taken that from us, and broken that unending chain of knowledge being passed down. But they were at least as smart as we were, if not smarter, and they tell us about exactly who and what these beings are, and where they dwell, where they come from, and usually without any doubt, they'll tell you that the legends will tell you that they come from other worlds inside the earth. Where you can call it fairyland, you can call it, the underworld, whatever you want to call it. But it's in their eyes, it was a very real place. When you look at the Hopkinsville goblins, you see basically what, for instance, the Germans or ancient people in Europe would have called kobolds or gnomes. You see what the people in the British Isles would have called, trowels and goblins and things of this nature, and they're associated with UFOs because of that particular case in Kentucky. But if you go back and look, for instance, in legends in the Scottish Highlands and other places all over the world, sightings of these little beings are associated with both the underworld and flying luminous objects, the ability that they have to fly away, things of this nature. These are all very old ideas, and it's just like when you see video of a UFO coming and going from active volcanoes. That's been photographed numerous times, or coming and going from the ocean, or large lakes, large bodies of water. So whatever's going on has always been here, and it's obviously something that's much closer to home, than perhaps even those beings themselves would have us think. There seems to be a definite disinformation campaign, for instance, in UFO encounters, to say, yeah, we come from up there. Oh, yeah, we come from over there. That's where we come from. Right. Over there, go look over there, look up there, but don't look over here behind the mountain, where your ancestors used to say we came from. Forget about that. Look up there, And meanwhile, while you're looking up there, what else is really going on behind the scenes?
So the aliens coming from beneath the earth, that's not really a new theory?
No. Well, here's the thing. You have legends all over the world about other beings who live within the earth, or they live, in a hidden realm that's right beside us, but we can't normally see it unless they want us to, with hidden entrances and things of this nature. And when you think about this, let us suppose for a moment that there's a race of beings, and I'm sure that the universe is teeming with life. I have no doubt about that, just because mathematically it would have to be. It would have to have civilizations. I mean, that's just logic. But let us suppose that there's a race of beings that evolved separately on another planet, on the other side of the galaxy, and for some strange reason they decide to come here and start taking eggs and ova from human beings. So they travel all the way across the galaxy, and then there's this big story about how they've got, this genetic problem or whatever it is that all the UFO literature seems to want to support. These, and that's basically what these people are being told when the material's being taken from them. Now, let's look at this logically. First of all, if they have the ability to travel across intergalactic space, interstellar space between stars in very short periods of time, and they could do all these wondrous things, why would they come all the way here, pick our particular species, which is absolutely unrelated to them, and try to do some sort of hybridization program? Because you understand that if they're that advanced technologically, then they would have no problem whatsoever repairing their own genome, changing their genome, fixing any kind of type of genetic problem that they have. We're at the verge now. We can almost do that ourselves. Every day we make more advances in genetic science where we can, create designer organisms. People are already starting to do it. So why would these beings come all the way here to take something from the monkey people, to fix themselves? It makes no sense. It's illogical.
No, well, that was an issue I also had with the UFO phenomena. That why would UFOs travel millions of light years just to cut up a cow?
Yeah, exactly. But if you start looking at it in terms of what the ancient texts tell us, for instance, the folklore of Ireland tells us that these beings come from the underground or this hidden realm, and one of their main purposes for coming to mess with us is because they need a fresh influx of genetics. They're somehow related to us, even if it's a partial relationship, which of course ties back to the Nephilim. And so if they don't get this regular or semi-regular influx of human genetic material, they cease to look human. They look more and more bizarre, more and more toward whatever their other type is. And this is something that you see in hybridization. It's called backbreeding, where you have a hybrid species, and what you'll do is you'll have a viable hybrid, and then the breeder will take that hybrid. And see, hybrids are not always sterile. That's not true. That's a myth. So what they'll do is they'll take this hybrid and they'll backbreed it to the one side that has the more desirable characteristics, and then they'll have another generation and they'll do the same thing again. They'll backbreed it to that species that has the more desirable characteristics. And if you look at for instance, Celtic lore, Nordic lore, Japanese lore, you'll see the same theme over and over again, that these beings desire human genetics, because if they don't get human genetics, they say that they have to have it. They have to have what they call fresh bloodline. If they don't get it, then they're doomed. So, if whoever and whatever they are, if they're hybrids to begin with, then that would explain why they're doing what they do.
Okay. One of the stories I found very interesting in your book was the story of Shaver.
Right.
And the picture rocks. Where exactly were these picture rocks that he found? I can't remember out of the book. I can't remember if you mentioned that in the book.
Yeah, sure. I talk about that actually in the last section of the book. But I actually have a whole other book based on that, about that very topic. It's called This Tragic Earth, and it's a look at Shaver's picture rocks and his interpretation. Not saying one way or the other, but it is very strange. I mean, Richard Shaver was an interesting guy. He was a wannabe pulp fiction writer, and he had some personal problems and some mental health problems and things of this nature. Now, nowadays when people have experiences, they have what we call the effects of that by names such as post-traumatic stress and things of this nature. Well, he had something happen to Richard Shaver, because he wrote about things and claimed they were true before they actually became part of popular culture. For instance, he described basically flying saucers, absolute perfect description, as being parked in the caverns beneath the earth by this ancient race that he called the Dero. And he said they had these things, and they used them to take advantage of the surface world and to fool us and all this sort of stuff. Excuse me. And so anyway, he talked about these UFOs before the first sighting of flying saucers by Kenneth Arnold, which coined the term flying saucer. And he came up with this whole mythos of this underworld that he claimed was real and preying on the surface world. Well, when he did this, this came out in some science fiction magazines. It came out in Amazing Stories in 1949, and it caused just an uproar because people scoffed at it, but then people started writing in and said, hey, this happened to me. This is what my grandmother told me, or that's what happened to my dad, and this type of thing. And it became this huge thing that started to tear the science fiction community apart. So for years he had this love-hate relationship with that that field. And he was really vilified by people because he swore his stories were true or based on truth. Well,
Okay.
when he moved into he finally had some things happen, and he had to kind of lay low, and he and his wife moved to Arkansas. And while he was there, he started looking around at some of the rocks in the Ozark Mountain area that he was in, and he started finding what he thought looked like. Yeah, he thought it looked like, faces and figures and stuff. So he got a rock saw, and he started cutting these rocks apart. And he would cut them into thin slices, finally, and he claimed that they revealed pictures. He basically was saying that what they were holographic recordings in crystal. And if you just had the right equipment that the ancients had, that you would be able to play these back and view them as like, immersive 3D type environments. He didn't have the language that we have today to describe it, but that's basically what he said. And so he took these rocks, and what he would do is he would slice them really thin, and then he would shine light through them onto a photosensitive surface, and he would actually leave an image on the surface. Excuse me. So that was pretty interesting. And some of those things are startlingly real. I mean, they look like photographs of people and animals and cities and all kinds of weird stuff. It's really, really strange stuff.
Yeah, well, that was the thing that amazed me about it, because you've got some of the pictures actually in your book,
right?
And they are quite amazing pictures, and they're very very clear of what they're actually depicting.
Right. Well, people call that pareidolia, and I believe pareidolia does exist. I mean, I've seen it myself, where something looks like, it's no different than when you look at a cloud and you see a dog or a face or, some other form that looks familiar, because the human brain looks for patterns. We're designed that way. It's probably a survival thing where you want to see, the face of the tiger in the brush or whatever. So, the human brain and the human eye automatically seek out patterns. But some of these things that he found in his so-called rock books go far beyond just looking like a pattern. Some of these things look like photographs, photographic images.
Yeah, most definitely. And one of the other stories that really actually struck me as very interesting in your book was the story of Norman, who was actually harassed by entities after his wife was into caving.
Yeah, that was a very interesting thing. He had some strange experiences. In fact, he had one of the earliest black-eyed kid experiences I've ever heard. Before the black-eyed kids were a big thing in the paranormal world or talked about, he had an experience where, that he saw one of these kids in a toy store one night. When there was supposed to be no other kid in there. Again, there was an association with caves and caverns and things of this nature. So, I've known other people who have contacted me besides Norman about the same thing, that they had experiences in caves and caverns. So you have to ask yourself, does this not sound like the same old stories that we've been told down through the centuries?
Yeah, I mean the thing that I was looking at is why was he harassed by entities in the cave? That's the part that apparently entities from the caves.
I mean, who knows? I mean, he had his own ideas about that. Who knows what the real reasons are? I mean, even when you look in classic or even modern UFO abduction cases, there are stories about people being taken to underground facilities. Very rarely do you hear a story from a so-called UFO abduction where they say they looked outside and they saw the Earth leaving, or they looked out and saw themselves going by the moon. Usually they're abducted and then they wake up in this strange place, and if they're not in the ship, then they're in some cavernous realm almost every time, or some underground base, things of this nature. So, it looks like, whatever's going on, it has a lot to do with misinformation and disinformation, misdirection of attention. So I wonder with this guy if maybe that what's going on with him was there was something going on with his estranged or ex-wife or whatever it was, and that it had something to do with an unsavory interest in her, and then since he had the child, then maybe it was just an extension, trying to reach out toward the child, because that's what he basically recounted, was that this thing was after the little kid. So
Yeah.
you have to say, and he intervened and stopped it. So it does seem to be the same old thing. I mean, when you look at the underworld, the story of Rumpelstiltskin, for instance, you have the same kind of a story where that what this thing is interested in is a child, a human child. I'll do something for you, but you're going to give me your genetics. You're going to give me the prize. Genetics seem to be the prize for these things.
Yeah, exactly. Just for those people that don't really know on the show, can you explain a little bit about the Nephilim?
The Nephilim, this is a Hebrew concept. It's something that people are familiar with Genesis chapter 6. In Genesis chapter 6, we're told there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God looked on the daughters of man and found them fair, or daughters of men and found them fair, and took of them wives whom they chose. And then it talks about how their sons were mighty men and all this kind of stuff, and says they were. If you look at the right translation, it will literally say they were the Nephilim, the mighty men of old. Basically, the story is that in that same chapter talks about how the world became filled with violence, and that was the result of this hybridization. Basically, there were, when you read the ancient esoteric texts of the Hebrews, you have the three versions of the book of Enoch, which basically tell the whole story, the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, a bunch of others that used to be in the Bible and they were taken out. At the same time, in the New Testament, I'd say at least 8 times that the book of Enoch is quoted word for word in the New Testament. The first half of the Epistle of Jude, it talks about this. It says, "For the angels who lusted after strange flesh and kept not their first estate." In other words, they lusted after human women, and they made themselves physical, and they had children with those human women. And see, these are the ancestors, because in Genesis it tells us, it's talking about the pre-flood world, before the flood. It says, "For there were giants in the earth in those days," and then it says, "and also after that," which means after the flood they tried it again. That's why you find in the book of Numbers, when the Israelites come into the land that they were promised, they come into a conflict with the Anakim, or the sons of Anak, and it says they are of the Nephilim, or descended from the Nephilim. Then you have, the whole thing with the giants of Gath. Goliath was one of the giants of Gath, and he had 9 brothers. And they all were giants, and they were described as having 6 fingers and 6 toes and all this kind of stuff. So this was something that supposedly was, there were originally 200 of these beings that were called Watchers, and they were actually stationed, according to Hebrew lore, on the moon, and their job was basically, it was almost like an outpost. Their job was to watch over the earth, watch over the people on the earth. But at some point, it was kind of like sailors on shore leave. They said, "Hey, let's go down there and let's experience some of that for ourselves." And so that caused all this chaos and upheaval on the earth, in the ancient world. And the result was the Nephilim, who were the sons of the fallen. Nephilim means those who have fallen, or those who have fallen downward to the earth. You see the same story with Zechariah Sitchin stuff with his Anunnaki, which are, of course, the Sumerian version. I have quite a few differences with some of his interpretations. I think there was a lot of fantasizing on his part in terms of a lot of his interpretations, but still, it's the same story. In the Old Testament, the sons of Anak, or the Anakim, are these giant hybrid beings, and the Anak are probably the same as the Anunnaki. I mean, it's basically the same root and the same word. And then again, you have even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found the apocryphal Book of Giants. It was just discovered. I wouldn't even say it's apocryphal. It was discovered in the 20th century. And the Book of Giants is very interesting because it's an Essene scroll, but it tells the story of what happened before the flood. It talks about Enoch. It talks about Noah. And it talks about this destruction that's coming on the earth because the giants, the so-called giants, see, they weren't just physical giants, they were mental giants. And they used their science to create all these hybrid, partially human, partially animal beings which of course the mythologies of the world are full of those things. And so they created all these things, and they basically were polluting the gene pool. They were destroying the genetic viability of all species by doing what they were doing. And so they had to be destroyed. And the Book of Giants has been found, and it actually tells the story. And the interesting thing about this, even though this is a Hebrew text, the leader of the book of the rebellious giants, the rebellious Nephilim, in the Book of Giants, his name is Gilgamesh or Gilgamesh, who is the great Sumerian half god, half human deity man who seeks his immortality because his father was a god or his mother was a goddess or something, and he's looking for immortality, but he's part human, so he can't have it. And this is the theme that you find in with the Nephilim. And again, that takes us back to this whole idea of a race of beings who have to have human genetics in order to continue their existence on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, where does Lilith come into all that? Because Lilith is all through the Bible too, isn't she?
Well, it's funny. Most people don't even realize that she's there. In the Old Testament, like for instance in the King James Version. Yeah, in the King James Version, her name is translated as night owl, ostrich, all this type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it is her name that is there in the original Hebrew. And she's a demonic being, generally believed to be the first wife of Adam before Eve. Whereas Eve was made from Adam's rib, which of course you're talking about genetics here.
Yeah.
Supposedly she was co-created with Adam, and that's why, for instance, she's a symbol for radical feminism today, because it's like saying she's equal to Adam. They use her as a symbol today, but in the ancient world and even in other parts of the world today, they don't use her as a symbol. They use her as a symbol only of evil, because the legend is basically that after she went off on her own, that she interbred with, again, the hidden, the unknown, the non-human, and created a race of beings that prey on humanity.
Okay. So Lilith isn't really linked with the so I just had a complete mental block. Not linked with the Nephilim at all.
Well, yeah, she's known as the mother of monsters, the mother of demons, the mother of evil spirits, things like this. Yeah. And supposedly she had an incredible number of offspring and still does. So, people took that very seriously. They didn't think it was a joking matter, put it that way.
Well, there are modern-day stories. People out there saying the Nephilim are walking around on the earth.
Yeah, there are. I mean, who knows? I don't think that if they are, that they're walking around as giants anymore. I mean, because that's too obvious. That's too obvious for whatever the purpose is. And I do talk about some of that in the book, where that's probably going, has been going for a long time. If you read, for instance, the book of Daniel, you'll see in the book of Daniel when Daniel's interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue that's made out of many substances. He gets to the feet, and the feet is described as iron mixed with miry clay. And people want to say what it says, but in any accurate translation, what it says is, "For as you saw the feet made of iron mixed with miry clay, so they will seek." It's talking about the last age of the earth, the last age of human history. That may be now. But it says, they will seek to mix themselves with the sons of men, but it will not hold.
Yeah.
So then you have to say, remember Daniel said the mysteries of this book will be concealed or will be closed up until the time of the end, and then it will be revealed. So we're learning things now. We know things now that we didn't know before about everything. And things that seemed highly, just purely symbolic, to people for centuries now make perfect sense. We see technology today that matches up perfectly with a lot of that type of thing. So.
Yeah, with with the Book of Enoch and all that, did they? I know they exist, but I don't know why they were kept out of the Bible exactly.
One of the main reasons they were kept out of the Bible is because they were considered just too scandalous for most people, almost like a distraction. There were some big arguments between various religious leaders, early church fathers. There were some very well-known church fathers who wanted to keep them in the Bible, and then there were others who said no, they've got to go because we can't have stories in the Bible about angels having sex with women, and giants that eat people and all this kind of stuff. So they basically ended up deciding that they were uninspired and had them taken out, which I always thought was pretty interesting since Christ himself quoted from the Book of Enoch. Timothy quotes from the Book of Enoch. Jude, half the book of Jude is written. When you see when the Bible says he comes with tens of thousands of his saints at the end when Christ returns. That's a direct quote from the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch was written 300 years before the birth of Christ. So, if it was good enough. If it was inspired enough for Christ to quote it and for his apostles to quote from it, why did they take it out?
That's a very good question.
It was just too controversial. It was too controversial. And, there are some Bibles, I believe, if I'm correct, there are some religious traditions, Christian, I think some of the Orthodox Christian groups and stuff left it in their Bible. And so that's one of the reasons we have it today.
I think there are some Bibles that do leave it in there.
Yeah.
Like, do you, in your thinking, do you believe that demons are living underneath us under the earth too?
Well, understand that if you study these types of topics, go into it. Don't go into it lightly. Let's put it that way.
I'm a demonologist.
I'll tell you this much. For instance, demons and fallen angels are two different things. Okay, a fallen angel is much more powerful than a demon. Satan is a fallen angel, but the fallen angels, there were two falls. There was Satan's original fall, and those cats are still coursing around causing trouble. And then it was the second fall, the 200 Watchers, and all those guys are now locked inside the earth. According to the book of Jude, even talks about that, where it gives you great detail about what happens to them in the book of Enoch. But the part of Enoch that is quoted in Jude says for the giants, for the angels who kept not the first estate, but lusted after strange flesh. He said they're reserved in chains of darkness until the judgment of the great day, which means they're chained up inside the earth. At the same time, and in the book of Enoch, where that quote comes from, it tells about where they are, how they were taken in the desert, and their leader was chained up in this place, and then others were chained up over here, and all this kind of stuff, and they're under the ground. At the same time, the demons are what the Bible calls, what the English translation calls unclean spirits. They have a variety of names in Hebrew and in related languages, but they basically are the spirits of the Nephilim who died. Now, when you understand that the pre-flood world consisted of, or the pre-cataclysmic world consisted of millions and millions of people, just like today. But a lot of these people, maybe the majority, were no longer completely human. They were part human. They were part fallen angelic DNA, basically. And so since they weren't supposed to exist, they were basically abominations. They weren't part of a planned creation, and they were produced by an act of rebellion. So that's why the Bible says, for instance, that when they die, Jesus said that these spirits they roam from place to place, seeking a place to stay. Now, by that he doesn't just mean a house; he means a body. Okay, because they had flesh, but they don't have flesh anymore. And there are a lot of these guys. So, for instance, let's say hypothetically, I don't think it's hypothetical, but let's say, for instance, when David killed Goliath, Goliath was one of these beings, whether he knew it or not. Okay, what happens to his spirit? He's not going to be redeemed. Okay, because he's not of the blood of Adam and Eve. He's only partially of the blood of Adam and Eve, and he's something else that's not supposed to be in the mix. So his spirit has to roam around until the day of judgment. And they know they have no place. No, it says in the Bible that they have no part in the resurrection. They know this. The Bible calls them the Rephaim. That's one of the main names of one of their tribes, the Rephaim, the Anakim, and a number of others. And these beings have no part in salvation, and ultimately they'll get the same fate of their fathers. And so people think that demons are just like some, silly thing or some sort of, unknown whatever. And you'll hear people on ghost hunting television shows that say, this is something that never walked the earth in human form. Actually, that's not correct. They did walk the earth in human form. They were really large, but they were in a human form or somewhat of a human form. But they're not human. They're not like you and I. And so their fate is not a good one, and there's a lot of anger there. There's a lot of rage and anger, and they know they're damned. And so, there's, basically it's as if the human race has been caught up in a family squabble that started before we ever existed, because Satan, he rebelled and all that sort of stuff. And, it's something that we're caught up in whether we like it or not. And so, these things shouldn't be taken lightly, because if you take them lightly, then you may regret it. But at the same time, don't be so fascinated by them. Don't be so fascinated. I tell your listeners, don't be so fascinated by these things that you become terrified of them, or that you become obsessed with them, things like this, because that too is a way of giving attention to something that probably doesn't deserve your attention beyond just a superficial level. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. The moment you said that, kind of, you wrote about a guy. I think his name was Daz.
What was that again? His name was what?
Some guy who had an experience with the demon Mahini.
Oh yeah. That's that was
Daz, I think his name was.
Yeah.
Can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, again, there you have again something that's looking for human reproductive materials.
Yeah.
This being is more akin to the Naga, the serpent people, but again, that could just be another form of the Nephilim, because the Nephilim mix themselves not just with human beings, but with animals. They mix themselves with the genetics of animals. It's basically science. The Book of Enoch says, for they mixed the man with the horse, and then, of course, they interbred with these things, and all this kind of stuff was going on. And so they were creating, all these hybrid forms that now we think are silly mythological forms, like, centaurs and satyrs and all these things. But then you have this whole pantheon in Egypt that are part animal, and part human, and things of this nature. But Mohini's a similar sort of a thing. She's sort of a Lilith figure, kind of a female, a succubus, a seductress, but she's not human. And she basically is part reptilian and part human. And it's very, the Hindu belief system is very clear about her. She's basically what they call a Nagini, a female Naga. But she's interested in, for lack of a better term, human male reproductive material in liquid form. That's what she's interested in. That in Hindu tradition basically says that she's after spermatozoa. That's what she's looking for. And so they even have a thing where they have a belief where if they throw if they're attacked, when they walk alone at night, they'll have a pocket full of white pebbles, and just in case she shows up, they say that if they throw the white pebbles down, that she'll stop to see if they're droplets of that material and give them time to get away. Of course, that's superstitious or whatever. But there are people who claim they have had encounters with her, and they were very terrifying encounters. So, this is the type of thing that you see again and again in, religious and folk and firsthand witness traditions all over the world. And, these types of stories have been going on for centuries.
Yeah, the kind of sleep paralysis stories.
Right, very similar, actually. Yeah. There have been people who've had the so-called sleep paralysis experiences, and they swear that there was something on top of them, something trying to rape them, or trying to, to mount them or whatever. And, they're convinced that that's what happened. Who am I to say that they're lying or that they're deluded, Yeah,
well, there's some people out there that say that like, the Men in Black. Like there's different theories on them. Whether some people say they're demons, other people say that they're aliens. You write a bit on them. I think I read a little bit on the Men in Black. I'll spit it out eventually.
Right.
I read it. You wrote a bit about the Men in Black.
Right.
In your book.
A lot of times in classic cases, they exhibit behavior. This is something John Keel noticed first, that, but they exhibit behavior as if they're undergoing some sort of depressurization. They're having some sort of problem. They have the same behavior as someone who has what's called the bends, where they have nitrogen bubbles in their bloodstream. They act erratic. The longer they stay in the presence of witnesses, the stranger they act. They stagger. They get very agitated, say if they go quickly, their eyes bulge out. They act as if they come from a more pressurized environment, somewhere where the pressure is much more intense than it is here where we live. And that will make sense if they come from somewhere, under the crust of the planet, and they stay there most of the time, then they're going to be used to greater pressure. At the same time,
well, that's like the blowing caves.
Right, exactly. But I have to say also though that in any of this stuff, you're looking at multiple sources for anything. The Men in Black, okay, it could be these so-called subterrestrials. It could be something paranormal, some of it. It could be real government agents, wanting you to shut up and not talk about what you saw because, of military concerns and defense matters and stuff. So you could have all these things going on, but they all get lumped together. And I think that happens with pretty much everything in the paranormal research realm. And look, you're going to have to throw in that there are going to be some people that are delusional. There are going to be some people that are lying and doing a hoax, making hoaxes.
Yeah.
All these things go together, and so that's what makes it tough to look at this stuff. You have to be as objective as possible when you look at this material because, I've seen plenty of stuff that I know was a hoax, okay?
Yeah.
That I have no doubt whatsoever, and I've even, debunked some stuff that was photographic because it was obvious what it was and how it was done. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that everybody who's had these experiences is a hoaxer or is delusional or was mistaken in what they say they saw. And the Men in Black is a perfect example. So
it is hard to rule out that theory when you're looking at even science says that our Earth is anything but solid. Yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, the Earth is filled with fissures, cracks, shifting plates. There's I talk about the MOHO, the Mohorovic layer, which exists right at the crust mantle boundary, and that's a worldwide phenomenon. Right at the crust mantle boundary, there's this cavernous, anomalous region that, when they look at it seismographically, it has peaks and troughs which correspond to looking like a 3D map of mountains and valleys. And if this is a hollow or even liquid-filled environment, it's going to be highly pressurized. When you talked about, you mentioned Blowing Cave earlier. There are caves all over the world, big cave systems. Lechuguilla cave system in New Mexico and Blowing Cave in Arkansas, but all over the planet there are these big cave systems that go back, and nobody will ever find the end of them, okay, because they go too far and too deep, and the logistics just don't exist to find these things. But one thing that these big cave systems all have in common is that they constantly emit huge volumes of air. Now, how is it that they can constantly have huge pressurized air flowing out of them unless there's some huge gulf under intense pressure that is filled with air inside the crust of the planet? There's no other explanation for that. I mean, the rocks aren't turning into air down in the mantle. That's not happening. So there's got to be somewhere down in there where there is air, and there is an air-filled void that's under intense pressure, and it blows out of these caverns. Yeah. I do remember, reading about one. I think you wrote about the Arkansas cave, and I find that absolutely incredible.
And it really leaves you thinking, like, that air has to come from somewhere.
It has to. I mean, you know, the interesting thing about the Moho Rovesic, which, you know, I just call it the Moho, like most people do. The interesting thing about the Moho is that it's one of these things that doesn't really have a good explanation for how it got there, why it's there. You know, it's basically worldwide. It's closer to the surface. If you take away the water and you think of the sea floor as the surface too, you know, the planet,
yeah.
It's closer to the ocean floor than it is to, for instance, the land underneath the continents, the surface of the continents. But it's worldwide. It's everywhere, and there have been several attempts by different governments to drill holes to it. Our Navy tried and gave up, supposedly. The Russians tried, and there have been various stories about what may or may not happen. They may have gone through, they may not, and then when they did, supposedly some really strange stuff happened. But nobody knows for sure if that's true or not, so you can't really, you know, go by that. But they did try, and it was something called the U.S. Navy tried something called the borehole project, where they tried to drill to the Moho. I don't know why you want to do that, because you might really mess something up planetarily speaking. But you know, when you look, for instance, at the book of Genesis, for instance, when it talks about whatever happened to cause the worldwide cataclysm, you know, if you read what it says that there was a firmament around the earth, and the firmament was in the form of a shell of water. It says there was water on the earth, then there was the sky, and above the sky was the firmament, which was made out of water, which apparently, you know, after the flood and the cataclysm, if you read the names of the patriarchs and stuff, you'll see that their lifespans get successively shorter lifespan with each passing generation, probably because that shell of water was keeping radiation from hitting the earth. Solar radiation, cosmic radiation that does, you know, genetic damage and causes aging. And before the flood, that stuff wasn't really reaching the earth. That's why Methuselah...
Well, they were living 900 years and stuff then.
Yeah, 900 years, yeah. I mean, so what happened was it says that if you look logically at what happened in that cataclysmic event, first it says that it started to rain. Well, something really large had to pass close to the earth to upset that shell of water, to knock it out of whack, you know, to upset the balance of this thing, and it started to fall apart. At the same time, it says the fountains of the deep burst forth, and the fountains of the deep were waters that burst up out of the ground. Okay, and my suspicion is that was caused by tidal forces from whatever this large object was that passed by the earth. So it did two things when it passed by. It knocked the shell of water, the protective canopy, out of whack, and it caused this internal tidal pressure in what was probably the Moho, but it was probably filled with water. It caused those waters to burst forth. And so you had a true cataclysm. I mean, you had earthquakes and probably volcanoes and eruptions from the ground and water pouring from the sky. It was, you know, I mean, what would happen if an object as large as, Saturn were to pass close to the Earth? That's exactly what would happen. You would have, worldwide tidal waves and earthquakes and all this other stuff going on. So, you know, it's not that far-fetched to really, you know, understand what happened.
No.
It's just that the language that we're given, you know, these were simple people trying to relate something that had happened in the most understandable way possible. So when you look at these ancient tales, whether it's from the Bible or whether it's from the Puranas in India and the Vedas, no matter where it's from, it's basically going to tell the same story about what happened in the ancient world and the same cataclysms and the same events, but they tell it in a way that's simplified in terms that people can understand.
Yeah. All right. Well, Michael, I want to really thank you for coming on today.
I really appreciate it.
It's been really awesome. Could you want to tell everybody where they can get a hold of you and where they can get a hold of your book? And it's I can tell everyone listening that it's an absolutely amazing read, and it's well worth the read.
Sure. I have a number of books, fiction and nonfiction. I hope that, you know, people will check out all of them. But Caverns, Cauldrons, and Concealed Creatures, the third expanded edition. Please buy the third edition because it costs less and it is more complete. and it's under my new publisher. Right now, it's the only authorized edition that I personally say, yeah, publish this. And it's a good deal. If you get it in Kindle, it's not that bad. And even in paperback, it's a good deal compared to what it costs in the previous editions from another publisher. So, yeah, the third expanded edition of Caverns, Cauldrons, and Concealed Creatures, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at bn.com, Books, Barnes & Noble. But definitely go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and get the third edition. Don't get any of the other editions because you're not going to get as much for your money as you do with this one. And I have another book of Richard Shaver called This Tragic Earth. If you just look up This Tragic Earth, you'll find that. And then maybe if you go look at my other stuff, you'll find my nonfiction and my fiction, my fantasy novels, science fiction and fantasy, and pulp fiction and things of that nature. So, yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. And by the way, my website is mottomorphic.com. That's MOTTIMORPHIC, MOTTIMORPHIC.com. And there's links to everything from there, too.
Excellent. No worries. Well, once again, thanks for coming on. And
I sure appreciate it.
I'm sure I will talk to you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a great weekend.
All right, everybody. I'm just going to play some music, and we will be back with Ashley after the break. Well, welcome back to the show. Our next guest is actually Ashley Hall. We were actually, if anyone is on the radio Facebook page would know that was a change in the programming. We were having Stephen and Evan Strong on about ancient aliens and stuff. But I'll bring Ashley Hall on right now. Welcome to the show, Ashley, and thanks so much for coming on.
How's it going, Brett? How you doing?
Very good, mate. Ashley's from the Paranormal Guide, and you're based out of Adelaide, right?
Yeah, just Adelaide, South Australia. That's where I call home.
You guys melting down there today?
Absolutely, 42 degrees. So hopefully my little pedestal fan next to me ain't buffeting the audio for you. But yes, I'm kicking back with a nice...
It's all good, mate. The magic of air conditioning. I love it. The way Adelaide's been going this summer, mate, I think you actually might need to invest in an air conditioner if all you've got is a little fan.
Well, yeah, I got air conditioning in the rest of the house, just not the office, which is kind of a bit crazy considering I spend at least 8 hours a day in here. So yes, you're right. I should be looking into that definitely.
So how long have you been actually investigating the paranormal for?
It's kind of a tricky question to answer.
Okay.
I just pretty much count it from when I turned 18. I had a huge interest in ufology first and foremost, and I was probably when I hit my early 20s, so about 2021, I started gathering case studies and going out there and talking to people who had close encounters, and yeah, basically started from there. And so for about a decade there, it was all about UFOs, and then unfortunately I had a relationship issue, had to move out of a house quick, lost all my case files with it, and lost 10 years worth of work, and then
no.
Yeah, it's crazy, but it's those things that you learn in life. But then after that, I just focused mainly on ghosts and hauntings. So it's quite interesting, but I still look into everything. As if you've been to my page before, you'll see I look into just about anything you can think of.
Yes. The Paranormal Guide loves the macabre from what I've seen on your site. I guess, well, now that you said that you've looked into UFOs, like our last guest we had on brought forward the theory that UFOs were from actually in the cavernous world, in the caverns in the earth. What's your take on that?
Oh yeah, I know a little bit about the hollow earth theory. It's one of those things I haven't looked too much into, and I found it interesting you guys were talking a lot about the real ancient stuff and ancient cultures. When it comes to the theory of the aliens, I heard what he said, how it makes no sense for this advanced civilization to come here just to steal eggs and sperm and whatever, and really it is a bit crazy, but there's lots of different theories out there. And there's a theory saying that these creatures or these beings, I should really stop calling them creatures, these beings from beyond our planet, beyond our solar system potentially are shepherding us, they're looking after us, maybe they want our resources. There's 100 different theories as to what they're doing here, and, I don't know how anyone can say what's right, what's wrong unless they've had direct contact with them. But yeah,
that's exactly right.
It's definitely interesting that people are thinking of the hollow earth and, these giant caverns underground, and maybe they're the solution to this whole alien hypothesis, that there is something on our planet that we don't know, maybe something that's a bit more advanced than us, that are kind of just hiding beneath the crust, so to speak, and coming out. And once again...
War of the Worlds all over again.
That's it. Well, the second I see a tripod coming at us, I'm probably going to give up researching and just take to the heels and run. But, I think
why not?
It's definitely something interesting to ponder, to think that. And there's stories right up until... There's modern stories, and there's people even today that are trying to get money to go to the poles, because there's a lot of people that believe that the entrances to these giant caverns or to a complete hollow earth are at the poles themselves. And if I remember correctly, well, not remember, if I can recall the research, I think the Nazis, World War II, were quite interested in this as well, and I've read a lot of different theories how they were looking for the hollow earth and that the Allies were also there, and there was all these crazy like mini skirmishes and battles over these openings. But I don't know, that seems to be delving more into the realm of fiction.
Well, I think there has been like some strange like satellite scientific studies and scans of the poles done that actually support that kind of a theory of there being strange openings up on the poles.
Yeah.
But that could just be the weird shape of our Earth or something, you know.
There's all sorts of...
Yeah, sorry, mate, go ahead.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of weird explanations for some of those supposed satellite images that do show these giant openings at the poles, but you know, I guess it comes to what you want to believe. And a lot with the paranormal is experiencing it for yourself, so, you know, I'm not really an authority to say whether there are these openings or not. I've never experienced it, but it definitely makes for interesting reading.
Oh, most definitely. But what I thought we might talk about first, and seeing as we had a lot of people listening from the States today too. I thought we might talk about a bit of the Aboriginal culture in Australia, because they've got a lot of myths, and I hate calling them myths because to them it's not myths, but a lot of beliefs as part of the Aboriginal culture that are very interesting, and they've got a hell of a lot of sacred sites.
Yep.
I know we kind of talked about this previously on the other show that I was involved with. But I thought we might start talking about Ayers Rock.
Yes.
Because for those people that are listening that don't know, Ayers Rock is just exactly what it sounds like, a big-ass rock in the middle of the desert. And it's probably the strangest thing you'll ever see. It's just this flat desert and this big oval-shaped rock.
Yeah, pretty much. I'll probably refer to it as Uluru rather than Ayers Rock. I do prefer that traditional name. It belongs to the Indigenous Australians more to us, so I'll tend to stick to the name Uluru personally rather than the European name. But it is an interesting place. I've never been there myself. I'm definitely going to get there within maybe later this year or early next year. But it is I'm pretty sure it's classified as a monolith. It's like you described it, pretty flat, sparse desert environment out there, a bit of scrub, and there's this giant red rock, which is the best way to describe it, I suppose. It is. It really discovered until we didn't come across it until I don't know the dates off the top of my head, but the later parts of the 18th century, I believe. But since that discovery, the European settlers or European people, white man, had been basically warned not to climb it. It's very sacred. It's an ancient place. It's very sacred to the tribes out there, and basically told, better off leaving it alone. But of course we got this giant wonder of the world sitting out there, and we have to turn that into tourism somewhere. So we basically confiscated the rock and the land from the traditional owners and turn it into a tourist destination. And of course tourists do what tourists do. They go out, they might know the knowledge and might have heard things about, the ancient history of the rock, but a lot of the time they don't really care. They just want a souvenir to take home. So they'll tend to do that. And, I've been guilty of it myself when I was younger, going out to a place and taking a nice stone or a shell on the beach or something home. And that's, rather a bit more mundane. But something like this, which has so much history, these people knew of the location of this place for 25, 30,000 years, maybe even longer. I'm not entirely up to date with how many, how long they've known about it themselves. But, people are taking these things home, and What's
it's probably
interesting?
it's probably the most sacred site for the Aborigines in Australia, I think.
It possibly is. You know, it's smack bang centre of our island continent here. You know, and just a fantastic place. Like I said, this giant rock out of nowhere. It would be little wonder that, you know, if it wasn't considered sacred. So although people had been warned not to do anything, you know, not even to climb this thing, and people had been, I'm not sure what it is now, whether they've banned the climbs or not. But a lot of people,
no more climbing.
There's no more climbing. Excellent. That's
No
a
more
good. But a lot of people are taking home rocks and stones from that location, even though they were told not to. And of course, when you don't follow these warnings, sometimes there are consequences, and people start having this real bad luck with their lives. And of course, whether or not it's got something to do with the rocks or not, who knows? But of course, they're thinking, well, I was told not to take this rock. I was told there could be a curse if I do. All this bad stuff's happening to my life. I best send this thing back and hope for the best. And now the ranger station up there gets sent a lot of packages, weekly basis, of these people who did the wrong thing, took home a piece of Ayers rock, or Uluru, sorry, or take home a rock or twig or stick or something from the location, and they're posting them back. And they're posting them back from all over the world. And we're not talking, you know, they're not always little pebbles or fist-sized stones. We're talking at times they've had 25 kilogram slabs of rocks sent back. Germany, and Lord knows how much that postage would cost. But these people are desperate. They think that their bad luck is attributed to these souvenirs, and they very well might have been. So now they're basically known as sorry rocks. You know, I'm sorry I took this. I'm sending it back. Please take it back. Please lift this bad luck and curse from me. So once again, it's just one of those situations where people did not listen to the people who know best.
How about the excess baggage getting a rock that big home?
I don't know. You know, I travel quite a lot.
Taking a 25 kilo rock home in your bag.
Unbelievable. Yeah, especially on an international flight.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah, makes you wonder, like you hear all this stuff from all around the world that people who've taken things from Native American sacred sites or all this and all bad stuff that comes from them, people are still doing it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't believe in this stuff, and you know, a lot of people believe that this stuff is garbage. They can't see it with their own eyes. They don't understand it, so they think they're impervious, either for the fact that it doesn't exist to them, or they don't believe it exists, so it can't hurt them. And you know, a lot of people like that, and I think a lot of people learn firsthand that there's some stuff that's not to be trifled with. You know, I think myself quite sensible. I'm fairly skeptical when it comes to anything, but when I go to Uluru, I'm definitely not taking anything home. For one, it's rude.
Right.
You've been told not to do it. Why would you do it? And two, just in case there is something to it, I don't want any of that bad luck thrown on me. I like my life the way it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you think about it, you know, like, yeah, it's facilitating what has happened to Indigenous people in Australia for a long time. You know, if communities have had areas taken off them. I mean, it's not just Australia. This has happened. It's happened everywhere. And then now there's people coming and still taking stuff off them. And of course something's going to happen from it.
And it's you know, if it belongs to someone else, leave it to someone else. I do think the land is back in the traditional owner's hands, but there is like a lease going on for it, like a 100-year lease or something. So tourists can still go there, but if you do go and visit, just pay attention to the rules. Like anything in nature, take photos, leave only footprints. That's the best way to deal with anything like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of sites in Australia that are deemed sacred to the Indigenous Aboriginal people here. And I mean, even back in the day, I've spoken to you about this location before, the old Morisset Psych Hospital. that was actually taken off the Aborigines and actually put an asylum on it.
Yeah. Well,
you know, and when they'd finished using it, they just handed it back to them.
yeah, I haven't been out there. It's one of those locations that's not really on the street maps. I'm sure it's not too hard to find, but I've heard some stories about the place. But you know, that just seems to be the ingredients to trouble. Take something that's sacred to someone, you know, remove it from them, build something of ours there, something that housed some quite disturbed people, I believe. Was that criminally insane, or was it just people that were...
There was a criminally insane section, yes, but they had everything there from people just even recovering from alcohol and drug addictions, you know, but there was a criminally insane section there too.
Well, the abandoned section, was the criminally insane department, was it?
Well, the whole lot's abandoned now because what they actually did with the place when they finished with it is pretty much just left it as it was and built a new one a couple of 100 metres away from it.
Yeah.
So it's basically just sitting there in ruins. There's one building there that was the criminally insane section, and then there was also a women's section. Then there was, I think there's only about 3 or 4 buildings left standing now. But yeah. It's,
I haven't been out there myself. Obviously you have. Sorry to turn this into around you, but I'd love to learn a bit more. So how does the place actually feel? Like when you're there, can you
It
feel
depends. Sorry, mate, are you there? I think I might be losing you on the Skype.
Oh, sorry about... Yeah, I was just thinking, sometimes when you go to these really ancient lands, you can almost feel there's definitely a feeling to it. But I've never been to a location that's had that feeling, but then had such a dramatic...
This place has an amazing feeling to it, whether you go there day or night. Now, I'm not 100% sure with this place whether it's just because there's only dirt road going through, and you have to actually walk through the bush to get up to the place. And when you get up there, all you do is just walk them through the bush, and then you just see these great big walls as you walk through the bush. I don't know whether it's that, but it's just got a real feeling to it. Yeah, it's quite a crazy place. The activity there, just like as with any place, is kind of up and down. But a lot of what you catch there, you are left wondering if what you've caught is something indigenous.
Yeah, fair enough too.
Yeah. Now I was having a look at your paranormal guide site.
Yep.
You've got a few good Australian places in there that I was having a look at yesterday in your blog section on your site. I think it's called Machati Park in Bathurst.
Oh yeah. Yep.
What's the story with that place?
Well, basically, the way I came across it, so generally, a lot of the times these stories aren't just, these articles aren't just things that I've stumbled across online. A lot of times people have written into me and said, do you know any information about this place? I'll start doing a bit of a history check and see if there are other people's experiences there.
Yeah.
And then go from there and put something together. Now, I'd heard that this place, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's either Machati or Makati Park. I don't know. I'll let the people that live in New South Wales, Bathurst, etc., correct me on that if need be. But yeah, it's this nice, well-kept ornamental garden, quite large block of land. And some people, some nights, have heard what sounds like blood-curdling screams. Now, you look online and you find these people's stories, and people have talked about it quite a bit. And there's generally the idea, the regular public consensus is, well, it's dark, it's a public place, maybe it's a little bit seedy after dark, maybe something's going on there that's not entirely legal, maybe an assault or something's happened. Other people say, oh, maybe a fox or something is calling. But there's other people that truly believe that there is some sort of energy there. Now,
Yeah.
no one that I know of has actually been able to go out there and conduct like a really good EVP session or something. It doesn't seem to be something that's an intelligent haunting, so to speak. So I did look around, think, okay, well, if it's not intelligent, maybe there's some residual energies, trapped in that location. So I did a bit of research, and I found that there was a jail that used to be built there that was located there behind the courthouse that kind of forms one border of the park. Now and executions did take place there. So from what I understand, it started off as just like a little watch house. Then they need something bigger, so they built the cells. And there was some executions taking place there. Now, there was quite a gruesome execution that happened where the rope was a little bit too long. And the person, a man named John Conn, I believe his name was, he basically went through a trapdoor and was decapitated. And, there's lots of gory stuff like that taking place there. So they knocked down the old jail when it was no longer needed. I'm not sure where the prisoners were transferred to. It'll be in the article anyway. I just can't remember off the top of my head, so I write so much. But, so it was demolished. And then a park was built, but this really weird park. The park previous to the one that's seen there now, and the trees they chose, they just grew up all gnarled and old and like something you'd see in a haunted house. So the city ended up putting up some money to get all those dodgy trees removed and have this beautiful park built there. And it was this huge affair. 2,000 people turned up to the opening. They had the mayor there and all that. And and that's basically a very short, sharp, and sweet history of the park there. But every now and then people that are walking past there or spending time there at night are hearing these screams. So they don't say whether it's female or male. It kind of seems to be quite androgynous. But there's just these screams that are taking place there. And someone wrote to me, so I had a look into it and found all this cool history.
Oh, awesome. Note to self, don't go to that park at night.
You want to. You're an investigator. Get out there, Brett.
So many cool places to investigate closer than Bathurst. But I'll put it on the list.
Good.
I kind of enjoy intelligent haunts. I like stuff thrown at me and that sort of stuff, As you know, I like to deal a bit with the darker sort of stuff.
Yep.
So the other one I was looking at, I think it's Australia. This one I didn't really actually take very good notes. St. Helena Island.
Oh yeah, Queensland.
It's in Queens. Yes, that's right. Yes, because I used to live in Queensland, and I have to say this is the first I've heard of this place.
Okay. So St. Helena Island. So it's in Moreton Bay in Queensland. I'm not entirely sure where it is when it comes to where and the Gold Coast is, but there's a series of islands out there. And it did have another name for a while there. Now, the way it got the name St. Helena Island now, a lot of people, when I put that article up, got a bit confused, thinking, well, St. Helena Island was also the place where Napoleon was basically exiled, and it became known as St. Helena Island, or already was. Now, the way that this place in Queensland got the name St. Helena Island is that they sent an Aboriginal man was in trouble. He was imprisoned and he kept escaping. So they ended up putting him on St. Helena Island. So Stradbroke Island had a prison. This guy kept escaping. His name was Napoleon, or the name that European gave him. And so they left him on this island, and they jokingly referred to it as St. Helena's Island because that's where the other Napoleon was left. And so the name kind of stuck. Now,
okay.
Quarantine stations were built out there, and after a while they weren't used, and it was converted to a prison. And it was known as Queensland and in Queensland's Inferno, the Hellhole of the Pacific, because it was just so rough. They were out in this small island they built their own accommodation essentially, and it was quite rough. Quite bad people put out there. The guards out there were quite bad to them. If you got on the wrong side of the guard,
common thread in these sort of places.
oh, absolutely, convict era, and if you got on the wrong side of the guard, your life was hell. Now there were lots of attempted escapes from St. Helena Island. We're talking people making makeshift boats. We're talking people just trying to ride bits of furniture out into the back to mainland Australia, and a lot of them died in the process. Now, when it comes to there's a cemetery out there. There's separate graves for the guards, separate graves for the prisoners and the convicts. When it comes to the ghost stories, there's not a lot out there, though you can go out there and do a bit of a theatrical ghost tour where they tell you a lot of the history and they have people dressed up telling about the way they died, so basically going through the prison. Yeah, but really, it's really just, there's not a lot left. The ruins, there's nothing with a roof left on it. The ruins are starting to crumble down. The largest ruins are basically the old butchers and bakeries that they had out there because it had to be kind of self-sufficient being away from the mainland. But it just looked to be a really, really interesting location, so I decided to look a bit into it and have a bit of a write. So one of those places... Did you go there
yourself, or did you didn't get there yourself?
No, I haven't been to Queensland yet. I really need to get over there. Basically, my travels have taken me to Victoria and New South Wales. I've been to a lot of awesome locations in those two states, as well in South Australia, but I've really got to go abroad a bit further to some of these other states I haven't visited.
Yes, well, it is a very big country, and if you're driving everywhere, then it's pretty hard to get around. If you want to see the whole country by car, you need many, many, many weeks to get around. So it's not an easy task of just saying, I might go to Queensland and have a look at this place. There's a fair contingency involved to get out and do it.
Yeah.
But I think from looking at your site, correct me if I'm wrong, but you love writing about the really macabre stuff.
Yeah, I'll read pretty much anything and research anything, but the macabre stuff is popular. One of the tricks, like I do those little pictures which has all the information on it, and basically if there's something scary or freaky on that picture, it'll get out there a lot more. So I do tend to bias towards the creepiest stuff because that's what people want to read. They especially love Japanese urban legends because a lot of the stuff in those countries, their legends are just so gory and creepy. And
I think those Japanese movies like The Ring and all that haven't really helped that matter either, just quietly.
Well, hey, it's a fascinating subject, and I think people definitely like to feel the fear. It's like people like to go on ghost tours and do things like that because, they're creepy, especially, if the tour hosts are really good and they've got really good stories, real creepy stories. Those locations are really quite popular because people like to be creeped out. We live in such a safe society now, for all intents and purposes, that fear, real fear is not an emotion we feel a lot, and I think people get that dose of fear, the adrenaline starts pumping, it becomes something that people can get addicted to, and so then they start... It seems to be a bit of a shame in one way because you find a lot of people that are interested in investigations aren't really interested in investigating just the whole enigma and the whole idea of the paranormal as a whole or ghosts and hauntings. They really just want to go to these really old, creepy places, old jails, old asylums, and I love them just as much as everybody else, but there seems to be a leaning towards that because you do get that fear factor in these really creepy places. And I think that's reflected in the posts I make that, the creepier the story or the creepier the picture I can tie to it, the more people enjoy it.
Yeah, like one of the stories that really struck me, and the biggest word that came in my head while I was reading it was why, was the walking corpses of Taraja.
Okay, yeah.
That is an out there story, man.
I'll agree with you. once again, the way I came across that is I basically, a photo was going around for a while. It's the main photo I used to illustrate that story, which basically shows a corpse in a blue dress, and she's kind of standing there with her arms crossed. And basically, the story said, in this one place in Indonesia, the corpses once a year come back to life and walk through the village. Now, they've kind of really mishmashed the wording on that. They've kind of really insinuated that these corpses are digging themselves out the grave and walking around. And this photo tends to kind of illustrate that. What you don't realize is that the woman behind the corpse is actually holding her up. Like a corpse that's been completely dehydrated and dried out. It's not going to weigh very much. They're very stiff, very easy for one person to hold up. But there is this fascinating ritual that takes place over on certain places of this island Toraja. So basically what happens is when someone dies, there's like this really big celebration of life, and they have these really huge ornate funerals. And a lot of these funerals cost a lot of money, as you can imagine. You want all the family, it's quite a, you want all the family, the friends, your locals coming in there to say, look, this is how much this person was respected. And it's basically dictated by how big and how flashy and elaborate the funeral is. Now, the body during this time, while these families, who a lot of them are just farmers and villagers, can't afford what they want straight away for their deceased relatives, so they basically put the corpse. The corpse does not really get buried until this funeral happens. The soul is still hanging around, and this can take weeks. Now, basically, after the funeral has happened, they're not typically buried in the ground. They're usually put in cliff faces, in caves, or in coffins that are up nice and high. They also have something that's noted as a baby tree. So if a baby dies before they have their teeth breach, I believe that's basically how they determine it, the child is still pure, and they basically go to what's known as a baby tree, and they carve out a little hole in the tree. They place the child's corpse in there. It's wrapped in like plant fibers, and then they basically close over the hole, and that tree basically encloses and takes in and absorbs that corpse. And they believe that as the tree grows, that the child's soul is able to go off on the wind. Now it's quite beautiful, really. And these child's corpses are always placed in a way in the tree that they're always viewing, like they're facing out towards where the village is. Now, the babies are left alone. They basically absorbed into the tree and drift off on the winds. But the adult corpses and the other deceased that don't have that, they're basically taken out, they're washed, they're redressed, and they're walked through the village. Now, they don't walk through the village, they're walked through the village. So they're basically carried. And almost like a parade. I don't like the word parade because it just makes it look like a spectacle, but really it's a respectful thing. And they're basically taken around. Now, what was interesting when I was researching this is that they state, like the people and the elders of their community state that it hasn't always been like this, and that they believe, and they tell stories, that back in the ancient days, in a much earlier time, that the corpses did walk themselves, and that if a corpse died far away from their village, that they would basically walk their way home so that they could have their big funeral. So it's a really, really interesting ritual. Lots of places around do that. Lots of places around the world do that, where they still take care of the corpses. They'll wash them, clean them, and basically keep them in good shape. Now, it's not every year, but they do have this ritual every year. But not everyone brings their family's corpses out every year. I think it's like a 5-year thing per family. But yeah, it was just one of those where a photo sparked my interest. I'm thinking, there's got to be more to it than this. You know, I can't personally believe a corpse is just going to walk around some village. So I looked into it further and found this whole story. So, but yeah, it's one of those posts that became really, really popular because it is rather macabre. If you remove the aspects of don't understand the community and their rituals, it does seem quite macabre. So it's one of those posts that did become quite popular.
Yes, yeah. Well, the picture. The reason I read it in the first place was because I was just scrolling down and I saw that picture and I went, "What?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking real zombie apocalypse when I first saw the picture.
Fair enough. Well, what's really bad is because when I do the little blurb on the pictures, there's only like 50 words of writing. I can't fully explain it. It's just there to hook someone into wanting to read the main text. Now, a lot of the people, they'll download the picture and re-upload it, but they don't put the text in, so now this picture's floating around, and it's almost reinforcing this idea that these corpses are walking around, which is a bit upsetting because there really is, 1,000 words of text that goes with it and really explains what's actually happening. But well, what can you do?
People running with half the story. Well, not even half the story, just the title.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's very interesting. I had a question come through on here.
Yep.
Have you heard of anything about like the ghost diver of Sydney?
I have. Is he the guy that's in like the really ancient like giant helmet with the little grill faceplate and stuff that's in Sydney Harbour? I really don't know much about him. There's a couple of things getting around about that, but I don't know the history of that myself.
I've only heard of divers seeing something like that, but I don't even know whether it's around a wreck or what. I haven't even heard enough of it about to even know that.
Yeah, when I do a piece, when I write a piece, I need to have a basic amount of information so that I can write an interesting piece. There's really not a lot about that. It almost seems to be more urban legend territory, whereas, maybe 2 paragraphs at most. This is a creepy story. If you go diving here, you might see this figure. I really don't know much more about it than that, unfortunately.
Neither do I. That's why I thought I'd ask. But also, someone asked about the Horned Man of Luna Park.
Which Luna Park? There's ghost stories in
I'm guessing Sydney if they're writing about Sydney.
I got the Horned Man. Yeah, that's tied to a ghost train fire that took place there in, I reckon it was the 70s. Once again, I can't remember dates off the top of my head. I'll give it a go though. There was the ghost train that used to be there. It was located where the Big Top is now. It was basically some people were on the ghost train. Some smoke was noticed, and there was a fire. There was inferno, and a lot of people didn't get out of there. Quite a few people died, including a man and his 2 young sons. I think there was another 4 or 6 people that passed away in there. Now, a lot of people just believe, it was a really, really old ghost train ride. It was out of date. The insulation around the wires, and it was starting to fray, and, it possibly was something related to that. An electrical short caused this fire, which wiped it out. There's other theories that, the carny folk, the people who run the rides, would just be smoking behind it. Maybe an errant spark lit the place up. But the other theory is that a lot of people came to a conclusion that this was some sort of strange sacrifice. That just before Damien Godson was one of the young children that died.
Okay.
As he was taking the ferry across the harbour to the side where where Luna Park was, his mother snapped a photo of him, and it's one of the last photos ever taken of him. And standing next to him is this strange man, like this well-built, muscly man, but he's got this really creepy bullhead's mask on.
Oh.
Now, it is quite creepy. I can't remember, a guy that wrote one of these books about the dark place in Australia managed to dig it up and found the story behind it. Now, they went to Luna Park, and this family, now the mother wanted to leave, but they said, no, let's go on the ghost train. The mother, for whatever reason, didn't go on there. She just knew that she didn't go on there, and that's what saved her life. She listened to an internal instinct that said, no, don't go on here. So everyone's piled on the ghost train. They've gone through. The place is burnt down. Some people died in the carriage. Some people died trying to make their way out, probably killed by the smoke and inhalation.
Yeah.
The weird thing about it is, so in the news reports, if you look at, there was obviously a lot of media attention at the time. There was inquests, all that. And there's this one story that kept popping up, and that is quite soon after the fire was believed to have started, people noticed that there was smoke. And as there was flames, people were telling the operator of the ghost train, don't send anybody in, there's a fire. But he kept sending people in. Now, I don't know whether he was charged for that or what, but people believe that with this horned figure and with this man operating the ride, sending people in there, possibly knowing that they were going to die, that there was this conspiracy, there was this ritual. Now, if you go back to ancient times, there was this god Moloch, and the way that they would basically offer a sacrifice to them was to basically burn them in the bowels of a brass bull statue or some other metal. They would basically burn, roast these children alive. So people have taken this icon of this bull-headed figure and the icon of the flames and the icon of people still sending people through that ride as basically maybe this was some sort of weird ritual that was taking place, and that the people that died in there was some sort of sacrifice. Now, I believe it was the very last issue of, I think, is it the Sydney Sun that is no longer around? I can't remember. There was an older newspaper in Sydney. Yeah, that one, Their front page headline on their very last issue before they were canned talked about this connection. So that was something else further fanned these flames of a conspiracy taking place.
Yeah. Well, it's whenever you look at Luna Parker, you always remember that. You remember that ride, and I've quite often it's on my list of things I want to somehow get to investigate. But being what it is and being how sensitive everyone is about it, I can't see me ever getting in there to do anything in there. But you can always live in hope, can't you?
Well, if you're interested in investigating that kind of macabre thing, the area to focus on is the Big Top. Some people have had some weird experiences in there, whispering in their ear, just not feeling right in certain areas, and that, from what I understand, is built right where the ghost train used to be located.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, one of the other things that I had said that I want to talk about today is like a lot of your things, a lot of your articles and that seem to be about haunted collections and people who have owned haunted items and that sort of thing. It's kind of a pet story of mine, pet thing of mine that I love talking about this sort of stuff because I wonder why the hell people do what they do. And I also interviewed recently the lady whose story was at the centre of, Andrea Perrin, whose story was at the centre of the Conjuring movie. And she kind of said during the interview that the story wasn't really true to the reality of what happened within her haunt. But the Annabelle doll comes up in that movie. Mm-hmm. Now, you researched the Annabelle doll, didn't you?
Yeah, it's the most popular post we've ever done. I managed to pick it up right at the right time, just as The Conjuring came out. Sure, I might have been playing on the media there, but well, as you can expect from Hollywood, they like to exaggerate things, make things creepier than they are, and I'm not belittling the parents' experience there. I'm sure it was terrifying. All this happened, but I think whoever wrote the script probably added a bit more, maybe took a bit of artistic license, especially with Annabelle the Haunted Doll. Yeah. Annabelle did not look anything like the doll they used in that movie. They used a doll that just looked a whole bunch creepier than what the real Annabelle does. And the real Annabelle doll was a Raggedy Ann doll. Everyone's seen one of them. You know, very, I wouldn't say cute dolls are creepy regardless, but, you know, quite a mundane-looking doll, buttonish eyes, red curly hair, wearing a nice little suit. Obviously was not scary enough for the movie. Now, the real Annabelle doll is in the Warrens Museum.
Yes.
And under lock and key, no one's allowed to touch her because she's meant to be, she's not very nice, apparently. The story goes that there was off the top of my head, there was a nursing student. She was living with a friend away from home in a small apartment. And her mother one birthday bought her Annabelle, the doll. And they started to notice that as they were leaving and coming back home again, that the doll would move around and certain things were taking place. At times she was seen to be freely standing, leaning against something. Now, if you've seen a Raggedy Ann doll, it's all cloth.
They don't stand.
Yeah, no, they don't stand. There's nothing about them. So at first they thought it was, oh, this is cool, this is interesting, let's see what's going on. Now, they had a male friend who the doll really didn't like, for whatever reason, I can't remember off the top of my head, and the doll basically started to do some quite creepy things around him. We got to a point where this doll, I believe, physically attacked him. So they brought in one psychic, and the psychic, or one medium, basically said, she started picking up on a young girl that had been killed in the area, and that she had grown attached to this doll and basically started using the doll as her form. They brought the Warrens in, and it turned out to be something much more sinister, and the Warrens took it away. And even the Warrens I believe, had some quite interesting experiences with the doll, just trying to transport it from the house back to where they store all their macabre curiosities. But haunted dolls seem to be, if I post up about a haunted doll, it's popular. I think everyone has a doll. There seems to be this innate creepiness with dolls, and I can't remember the exact psychological term, but basically the reason why a lot of people have a fear of dolls and mannequins and even humanoid-looking robots is because they're modeled on us, but there's just that tiny little thing that's different about them that makes it quite unsettling in our own minds. And there are heaps of haunted dolls out there. Probably the most famous one is Robert the Haunted Doll.
Yeah, but the haunted doll.
Yep, there's also, we've got one in Australia, Letta, an old gypsy doll. She got around quite a bit in the 90s, back when that show The Extraordinary was around, in about that period. So,
what's the story with that one?
Okay. Once again, off the top of my head, it's been a while since I wrote that one. There was this, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but when he was growing up in his town where he grew up, there was this one house that used to absolutely creep him out. You know, the stereotypical haunted house in the neighborhood where the kids would talk about saying there's ghosts in there, and they'll dare each other up and knock the doors, things like that. And basically, it was built into him that this was a creepy house, and he really didn't like it. As an adult, he moved away from the town, and then he had to go back to that original town, the town where he grew up, for a wedding, or there might have been a tragedy in the family. But for whatever reason, he went back to his hometown, and he decided that he would face his fears. So it was a stereotypical horror movie type night. So it was raining, there was a bit of thunder, and he was alone.
Yep.
The house was still there. It was standing abandoned. He had it with him, like this dodgy little torch, and he decided to go in there and have a look around. Now, I believe he couldn't find his way into the house proper, but he found his way into the basement. So as he's crawling through this basement, probably silently, freaking out to himself from all the stories he heard as a kid, he's passing his torch backwards and forwards, having a look around, when all of a sudden he lights up what he thinks is this small child, which absolutely made him freak out, as you can imagine. You're not expecting to see a small child in the old haunted house that you grew up around as a kid. And so, he freaked out, but he stuck it out, he looked at it, and he found that it was a small doll.
Huh.
Now, he took it back home with him, and he started having all this really good luck. I think he deals with antiques or something, so his business started to get really good. He was able to get a new house, and he chalks it up to this doll. The problem is women don't seem to like this doll, and mediums and that, he would show it to him. It got around that he had this haunted doll, and he would, he befriended this medium, and she would, do her little talks in shopping centres and at places like that, and the doll would be with them, and, as part of their story. And they would have the doll sitting on a seat covered in a sheet until it was time to talk about it. They would take this sheet off this doll, and people would faint, people would freak out. there was all these really negative reactions. People holding this doll would just have these really, really, really bad reactions to it. So we decided to have, people would absolutely freak out. I'm talking fainting, going into crying fits, really, really bad stuff. He eventually decided to send it to a museum to see how old it was. He thought it was quite old, and it turns out to be old. It was, it's all hand-carved, all handmade. I think it's nearly 200 years old. They were able to date it by the nails that were in its shoes to basically nail the feet to the legs. And they reckon it was gypsy built. And Medium told him that it was basically built in the likeness of the man who built it, created it, built it in the likeness of someone he loved, possibly a daughter, possibly a girlfriend. Now, he's also been told if he ever gets rid of the doll, all the good luck he had will be converted to bad luck. So I'm pretty sure he still holds on to that. But yeah, just...
Yeah, I'd be chaining it to myself, probably.
Handcuffing it. Keep it with you all the time. Yeah?
Yeah. You don't want that thing stolen out of your house, do you?
No. But, haunted objects
It
are
makes
really...
you wonder why people collect these things just quietly.
Well, I have myself a small collection here of things, and I got a painting here that turned out to be really interesting. Pardon?
You're a haunted collector too, are you?
I wouldn't call myself a haunted collector. I'm a collector of souvenirs. Like, when I go to these locations, I'm usually, people know I collect these things, so they usually give me bits and pieces. So I've got all sorts of weird stuff. But I have a friend who lives in a town called Mount Gambier here in South Australia.
Yep.
She was having these really, really bad recurring dreams, dealing with shadow figures, dealing with this house she's never seen before but seems to be really quite familiar. And there was a period of time where she didn't like to sleep, mainly because she would have these dreams. They absolutely terrified her. She went to a friend who was a medium, and basically her friend said, well, you're a really creative person, you like to paint, channel those thoughts and those feelings into a painting. So my friend went away and did that. And did a painting that, have you heard of the Hat Man? It's kind of in shadow people lore, kind of shadow figure wears a hat. She painted something that looks... Yeah, she painted something that looks really similar to that, but surrounding him are these really kind of like stick figure-ish shadow people. So she painted this picture. The words "I see you" are written on it, like "I see you," like it's seeing her, and she took it back to this medium. See what the medium said it would say about it now that she's able to put it down and used her own energies in her art as an interpretation. The medium said to her, well, good, you've painted it, it should be out of your system. You cannot sell that painting. You have to give it to someone who is willing to take it. She came down to Adelaide. I took a couple of places around here. She told me the story about this painting. I said, well, I'll take it. Give me this creepy haunted painting, I'm fine with that. Yeah. So I brought it home, and I hadn't got around to putting it up yet, and I had it draped over a piece of furniture in my office. A couple of weeks after that, I was away at an investigation. My partner Meg had left a Facebook message, like a public Facebook message saying, Ashley needs to move his museum out to the shed. The office is too close to the bedroom. Creepy stuff starting to happen. So I'm getting a bit concerned. What's happening in my office here? I come home, I talk to her, and she tells me what happened. She was alone one night. She was in the bedroom. She had the cat in the bed. The cat started reacting weirdly towards the direction of the wall that adjoins the office. So she gets up, thinking there might be an intruder. She gets to the bedroom door, and then she could hear in my office the sound of someone just bashing on my keyboard, bashing on keys. She still thinks there's some sort of intruder. I don't know why an intruder would be bashing on my keyboard. Maybe they're trying to
emails while he breaks into your house.
Yeah, who knows, make use of it. So she's quite brave. She may have had the hockey stick in her hand or whatever. She opens the office door. There's absolutely no one here. So she's telling me about it. I said, oh, that's interesting. I messaged the person who gave me the painting, and she said that she found that interesting because ever since she gave me that painting, her dreams have stopped. I thought that was going to be the end of it. A couple of weeks after that, I'm sitting right where I'm sitting now talking to you. I'm right in front of my computer facing a wall. Just I think I was writing another article when all of a sudden I heard footsteps coming up my hallway. Now, no one else was home. The doors are locked. I'm thinking, okay, here we go. time to rock and roll. So I've grabbed my nice little bludgeoning object next to my desk here for such occasions. I've never had to grab it before. And I go up to my office door. I've got my hand on the handle, and I'm just listening. I could still hear these footsteps. I could hear them clearly on the wooden floorboards. So I've quickly ripped open the office door. I'm standing there brandishing my weapon. I was probably only in my boxer shorts because I don't bother getting dressed if I'm at home. So it would have been quite a comical sight to whoever was on the other side, but there's absolutely no one there. So I'm kind of puzzled. I'm out down my hallway. I could hear the footsteps right behind me. They had come straight past me. They're now walking on the carpet in my office.
Oh, I hate that stuff.
I then heard this weird flapping noise. I quickly turn around. The painting, which I hadn't moved, it was still draped over the piece of furniture, looked like it had just been dropped and was just kind of slowly flapping against it. So then I was like, oh, that's interesting. I kind of did a little bit of work around it, see if I could figure it out. You always go into that debunking process whenever anything happens. Yeah, couldn't figure it out.
Hard one to debunk, though.
Yeah, I couldn't. There was no windows open, nothing like that. It could have been something, who knows. We're always having little tremors, but it was the footsteps that had me baffled. So I just went back to doing my work. There's nothing I could do about it. If there's something in my house, there's something in my house. My rules are, if there's an entity in my house, just leave me alone when I'm in the bedroom. The bedroom's sacred ground. Don't freak me out while I'm sleeping. So I went back to doing it. The activity in the house settled down. I rang my friend who did the painting and said, the activity settled down there, and she told me her dreams had come back. So I don't think there's anything happening with the painting anymore while she's got the dreams, but I still have that painting there. It's an interesting piece of work. It's got a nice story behind it. I really like that stuff. But yeah, it was just one of those interesting things. I was like, wow, cool. For a while there, I may have had a haunted...
Very enough, though, mate, without having them hanging on your wall.
Well, it's hanging behind the door now. I can turn around and right now, and I've got these shadow figures just staring at me, but there's no creepiness to it anymore. I think it's now just a painting. But for that period of about a month there, it was quite bizarre in this office and in this household.
Well, it could have gotten rather ugly for you if that sort of stuff kept on going, because it wouldn't have been much fun. You probably would have had to have gotten rid of the painting after a while if it kept on going, I'm guessing.
I would have fought against it for a while. I probably wouldn't get rid of the painting altogether. Probably would have moved it out to a shed if it got that stage. But, if it was really negative, I'd try to investigate for a while, but I've never had... Oh, shit. Pardon me. So my girlfriend just creeped up behind me while I'm telling this creepy story and scared the hell out of me. But
good.
She's coming here to pour me a nice cold drink because it's bloody hot in here. But yeah, I don't think I would have got rid of it altogether. I probably would have just moved it out into the shed as suggested. But, that's just me. I'm sorry about the swearing there, man. She really startled me.
No, that's all right, mate. I've got a song that on my studio here where I'm actually waiting until I've got enough guts to play it, but it's got the F word in it, and the song's titled "Can You F a Ghost?" And it's actually quite an interesting song, but I haven't had enough guts to play it.
Ah, well.
But I've actually got a friend that collects stuff. Her name's Yasmin, and she loves collecting her haunted dolls, and she always gets activity with them. And she knows every time she tells me about them, I sit there and look at her and shake my head. And she collected a Dibbook box.
Oh, excellent. I've been doing a little bit of reading into that. I don't know all about them yet. I'm going to write something on it, but they seem quite intriguing. They're a box that holds the negative spirit in Jewish culture, aren't they, or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, it's in the Kabbalistic traditions, and it was already open when she got it. So I said, well, it shouldn't be an issue because technically you didn't open it. You bought it already opened. So if anyone's cursed with those things, it's the one who opened it. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But she had things started getting really weird and really dark in her house to the point where she actually had to get rid of the Dibbook box to stop everything.
Well, hey, I'll put it out there. If anyone's got like an item they no longer want, send it my way. I'm keen on that. You know, I haven't really had anything too bad, so I'm still quite game. I think it's going to take me to...
Technically, with a Divock box, it should be going after the person that opens it. That's the way the tradition works.
Yeah.
With those.
Yeah, maybe there was something else attached to it in some other way, or maybe she's just got another item that maybe felt in charge by having such an artifact near it. Who knows?
Yeah, well, she's got that many damn haunted objects in her house. I don't know how she can work out what's coming from where. just quietly. But that haunted painting you talk about, there's also been stories of haunted paintings that have actually people have talked about moving. The actual, I can't think of it now. You wrote an article on it, I know you did, of an old, and the people in the picture actually look like dolls more than they look like people. But apparently they moved around in the pictures.
Yeah, they're the Crying Boys, I reckon. Is that the one you're thinking of?
That's the one, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit of a stranger story. So there was an artist. I'm going to actually just quickly look up his name if I can find the bloody article. No, it's not there. Quick to. But there was this artist, and he was basically painting pictures of children that look really quite morose. They look sad.
Yeah.
They're unhappy. There's tears dripping out of their eyes, and you know. But what happened is, I think he was just selling them street side style or somewhere in Europe, and obviously a company liked them, bought them, and started reproducing them. So people that had this painting in their house, well, what was happening first? There was a lot of fires taking place, and there was this one fireman that noticed that in a lot of the fires he was going to, one of the only things that was remaining that should have burnt up were these prints of these paintings, these Crying Boys.
Yeah.
So the newspapers got hold of this, and a lot of other people were writing in saying, my house burnt down, my Crying Boys survived, things like that. And, you know, it became a bit of an urban legend that these paintings were causing these houses to burn down, and no one for a long time knew why that was. But the newspapers took up on it. You know, this was a really good media opportunity. You know, people love reading this creepy stuff. There's a lot of people talking about it. So they were organising burnings of these Crying Boys. So if you had one in your house, you'd go to these meeting spots, they would pile them up, and they would put the torch to them to get people away from the Crying Boy. There were also paintings known as Crying Girls. I don't know if that was the same artist. But if you had them both hanging up, you were fine. They would negate each other's effects. Now, when doing a bit of research into this artist and as to why he was painting these pictures and how he came across the models, one version of the story was that, you know, he basically... there was a orphanage burnt down. The children were upset. He was painting them. That's just one version of the legend. Now, he ended up taking one of these orphans under his wing as some sort of artist apprentice, and this child had a bit of had some artistic talent of his own. So they had a good relationship working together. When all of a sudden the artist's studio burnt down, he blamed the boy. He said, you know, I was told not to take you in, that you were the cause of the fire of this orphanage. I shouldn't have taken you in. Now my studio's burnt down. Now I'm ruined. Kicked them out. And they reckon that's how the curse started. That this war affected all these other paintings. Now, his name was Don something. Now the boy ended up growing into an adult. Legend states he died in a car crash, and that the only thing that survived was a photo on his driver's license, which further added this whole myth of the Crying Boys. Now, whether this is a legitimate cursed event where all these prints of this painting were causing houses to burn down, I don't know. But there is also a mundane explanation, and I think the explanation in itself is as interesting as the story. And the skeptics that came forward saying, well, if you've got this painting up, like these prints were made to look like the original paintings, they were covered in a varnish and all this, they would be in frames, they would have a backing on them, they'd be hanging on the wall. Now, what the skeptics were saying was that, well, if there's a house fire, if that painting is affected in any way, what's the first thing that's going to burn up? The string that's holding it up. The string snaps or burns away, the painting falls down, lands on its face. That's how the paintings were surviving. That's the skeptic view on it anyway. So, two sides to look at with all things. Still an absolutely interesting story, and I just like that the media at the time really got behind it and were organising these public burnings of these paintings because a couple of houses burnt down. But, when I posted that, people were freaking out. Oh my God, my mother has one of these paintings in her house. What should I do? What can I do to stop a house burning down? I'm thinking I probably wouldn't worry about it. Hasn't happened in a long time. It was only at the time that was really being talked about that people started talking about it, and there was this worry. But I don't think it's really been. I don't think a house burning down has been attributed to a crying boy painting for a couple of decades at least. Yeah,
and I don't think I'm pretty sure the fireys probably would have found a natural explanation for the fires. Somewhat of a natural explanation, anyway. Unless the fire started in the middle of a room where there was no power source or anything.
Yeah, just a spontaneous combustion. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
houses.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, do you want to tell everybody where they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about myself or the Paranormal Guide, probably the number one place people will find us will be on Facebook. So it's just facebook.com/the Paranormal Guide. If you just type the Paranormal Guide in the search bar at the top, you'll find it. Nearly every day there's something new going up there, and we reshare a lot of the older articles too on a regular basis. If you go onto the photo albums and check out the albums titled The Paranormal Guide and The Paranormal Guide 2, there's so like 380 different pieces to read in there, so that'll keep you busy for a while. We're also I've got my own website, theparanormalguide.com. That's slowly being updated and brought up to date, but I've got a lot of stuff to add in there. But we do a lot of competitions and things like that through there. The best feature of the website, though, is probably the Paranormal Atlas I've put together. So you can go into the blog section and look for the articles via topic, but if you go to the Atlas page, you can find it. You can find stories by geographic location. There's a map of the world with pins on it. You can click the pin, so if you live somewhere and want to look for something to read that's close to you, just find your place and click the closest pin, and that'll link you back to an article. And we're also on Twitter and places like that, but I have no idea how the addresses work. Just look for the Paranormal Guide and you should find us. Pretty simple.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for coming on today, mate. I really appreciate it. It's always good talking to you.
Yeah, well, look, we'll do it again.
Yeah, I'm sure we could easily do it again, mate. I'll make sure I can hook you up again and get you on again, because, I think we could have gone for another hour and a half today.
Easy.
Yeah. All right, mate, not a worry at all, and we will chat very soon.
Thank you very much, Brett. See you next time.
See you, mate. So that's the show for today, everybody. I want to thank you for tuning in. Please tune in next week. We have Nick Redfern and who was it? Nick Redfern and Katrina Rose. Going to be an amazing show. We'll see you all then. Have a great week.
When we come to see the teddy bears are here to play. If you don't come play with us, then we will kill you.
Are you nervous yet? Bye.